What's up, everybody? In this video, we're going to cover USACO's 2019 February contest at the bronze level. Problem number 3, measuring traffic. The highway adjacent to Farmer John's farm has recently seen a dramatic increase in traffic, or at least so it seems to Farmer John. To be sure, he wants to measure the traffic flow on the highway with a set of sensors, each capable of measuring the rate of flow of traffic on a segment of road. So basically, a sensor that sits across the road, and every time a car drives over it, that counts like 1 and then 2 and then 3, and counts how many cars go by. Unfortunately, while walking through the barn one day, Farmer John trips and drops his box of sensors into a large vat of milk, after which they no longer work as well. Instead of producing a single exact reading of traffic flow rate, each sensor now outputs a range of possible values. For example, a sensor might output the range 7 to 13, indicating that the rate of traffic flow on a segment of road is no less than 7 and no greater than 13. So somewhere between 7 and 13, with 7 being the lowest, 13 being the highest, and anything in between being possible. The highway runs for N miles next to the farm, and the traffic on the highway flows only in one direction, from mile 1 to mile N. Okay, so the entire road is just a number line starting at 1 and running up until N, and it only goes one direction. Farmer John wants to install N sensors, one for each 1 mile segment of the highway. So sensor here, every single mile is going to have a sensor. In some of these segments, there are on-ramps that allow traffic to enter the highway. Okay. In each of these cases, Farmer John will install his sensor on the on-ramp to measure approximately the amount of incoming traffic. Okay, so it won't just be cars that go by, it will be only cars that are being added. In some segments, there are off-ramps that allow traffic to exit the highway. In each of those cases, Farmer John will install his sensors on the off-ramp. Same story, that'll tell you how many have gotten off of the highway. Each segment contains at most 1 ramp. If there is no on-ramp or off-ramp in a segment of highway, Farmer John installs a sensor on the main highway itself. That's just flow of traffic. Given the readings from Farmer John's N sensors, please determine the most specific possible ranges that describe the rate of traffic flow initially on the highway prior to mile 1, and for traffic continuing on the highway past mile 1. These ranges should be consistent with all N sensor readings. Okay, so essentially what we're trying to do is we're trying to figure out how many cars there are on the highway. We want to know how many there were at the beginning and how many there were at the end. At the beginning, if I have on-ramp, so for example, let's actually read over the input format before we get into details. Input format comes from traffic.in, that's a file reader. The first line of input contains N, which is between 1 and 100. Each of the remaining N lines describe a 1 mile segment of the road in order from mile 1 to mile N. Okay, so they're in order in that way, one after the other. Each line contains a string that is either on, if there is an on-ramp, off, if there is an off-ramp, or none if there's no ramp. And remember, if there's none, then that's just measuring the flow of traffic along the highway. Followed by 2 integers in the range of 0 to 1,000, indicating the lower and upper endpoints of the sensor range from this segment. Okay, so like for example, this is an on-ramp, looks like exactly 1 person got on. If the segment contains a ramp, the sensor reading is from the ramp. Otherwise, it is from the main highway. At least one of the highway segments will be designated as none. Output format goes to traffic.out. First line of output should contain 2 integers giving the most specific range possible for the rate of traffic flow prior to mile 1, that's at the beginning. The second line of output should contain 2 integers given the most specific range possible for traffic flow after mile 1, that's at the end. A valid solution is guaranteed to exist. Okay, so I've got mile 1. Let me actually kind of draw this like a highway. So mile 1 has an on-ramp, and in this example, there are between 1 and 1 cars getting on the on-ramp. We don't know how many there already were at the beginning. That's what we have to solve for. So we've got a sensor here that's measuring between 1 and 1. The next mile, we have no on-ramp or off-ramp, and it's 10 to 14. So that's from 10 to 14 cars passing by this location, but we don't know. It could be as low as 10. It could be as high as 14. Now, immediately looking at that, it looks like what that means is that if we knew that exactly 1 car got on here, then my starting range looks like it might be 9 to 13. Because if I had 9 to 13 cars traveling along the highway and I had exactly 1 car get on, then the resulting of that would be between 10 and 14. Because if there were 9, there now must be at least 10. If there were 13, there must now be at least 14. And if there was anything in between, it'd be between those 2 numbers. So we've got 1 car joining the flow of traffic. Now, next mile marker says none, and it's between 11 and 15. This gives us an interesting piece of information, 11 to 15. If this is from 11 to 15, then that tells us that we couldn't have possibly had 10 cars here because there's no on-ramp or off-ramp at this location right here. So if we know that as of this moment right here, we have at least 11 cars, then we know that actually 10 is too low. This sensor read, remember this is reading a range. It doesn't know for sure how many cars. It thinks there's somewhere between 10 and 14 cars, but we know for certain there's at least 11 cars here, which means actually this must have been an 11 and not a 10. And that's just the sensor being incorrect. But that has implications further down the line, because if this is at least 11 cars as of here, and we know one car got on, we can't have possibly had 9 cars here, because if I had 9 cars and one got on, sure, I would have had 10 here, but then I couldn't have possibly had 11 here, which means that this range now is actually 10 to 13. Because then if I have 10 to 13 cars and one gets on, this says 10, but I would have had 11 to 14. And then once I get to this range right here, which guarantees at least 11 cars, then now that makes sense because I have had to have had at least 10 cars to start with if I have 11 cars now. Finally, I have somewhere between 2 and 3 cars off the off-ramp. Well, as of here, I think I had 10 to 13 here because it says I had 10 to 14 here. And actually, this one said it could have been as high as 15, but we know that can't be the case either because I only had 14 here and I could not have had more than 14, which guarantees that this 15 can't possibly be here. So if I had between 10 and 13 getting on at the beginning, and then 1 to 1 got on, it means I should have had something between 11 and 14 here. So if I have 11 to 14 cars here, and that tracks because if I had 10, then now I have 1 more, I've got 11. If I had 13, I have 1 more, I've got 14. I can't have had 15 because I only had 14 here. And I must have had at least 11 because I can't have had 10 here if I got 11 here. I've got 11 to 14 cars. Now, I don't know how many are going to be at the end. I have to figure that out. At minimum, I have 11 cars. At most, I'm going to have 14 cars. Now, what that's going to mean is if I have 2 to 3 cars getting off, what's the smallest number of cars that I could possibly have? Well, if 2 cars got off, then I would have 9. But if 3 cars got off, I would have 8. And that's what the question's asking is what's the lowest possible number? So if I know I have 11 cars here, assume the most possible cars got off the freeway. That's going to put me at 8 cars minimum over here. I can't have any less than 8 cars. Likewise with the 14. If I want to have as many cars as possible at the end, then I'm going to take the largest number. I'm going to subtract the smallest number from the off-ramp, minus 2, is going to give me 12. And that means I've got between 8 and 12. So over here, I've got the 8 and 12, which is the ending number. Back at the beginning, I've got 10 and 13, which is the starting number. So how do we do this with an algorithm without having to go back and forth? Because we know that n doesn't have to be too large, but we do have to get organized. We don't want to just keep passing back and forth, trying to figure out all these numbers. We need a way that we can kind of do one pass. Let's keep the same numbers we generally had, but what would happen if we had a range on the on-ramp? Because that's kind of a big question mark. Let's say I have 1 to 2 cars. So if I know at the end, I want to try and get the smallest number possible, then if I have 11 cars and I have 3 get off the off-ramp, then I'm going to have 8 cars left. With the on-ramp, though, I want to do it the other way around. I want to keep the minimum as low as possible, which means if I were to have 10 to 13 here, I would add the 1 to the 10. I'm pairing up the smaller numbers, and I would add the 13 to the 2. Because when we have on-ramps, we want to try and maximize our difference. When we have off-ramps, we want to try and minimize our distance, our difference. And the reason why is because we're always trying to find the largest range we possibly can. So if I know that I've got, for example, 10 to 13 cars here, and I have 1 to 2 getting on, then the fewest number of cars I could possibly have would be 11, which is 10 plus 1. And the largest number of cars I could possibly have would have been 15, which would have been 13 plus 2. And this is if I change this to from 1 to 2 cars. Let's go ahead and knock out this whole middle section and just say we have no other sensors other than this and then the off-ramp. So I want to know, just kind of focusing on the off-ramp and the on-ramps here. If I somehow know for a fact I've got 10 to 13 at the beginning, and I have 1 to 2 getting on, then again, I want to add my small numbers, which means the lowest possible I could have would be 11. Largest possible would be adding the big numbers, which would be 15. Now, once I get over here, if I know 2 to 3 is getting off, again, I want to try and maximize my difference. So in this case, since they're getting off and that's subtraction, I'm subtracting the large number from the small number. So 11 minus 3 is going to be 8, and then 15 minus 2 is going to be on. In order to maximize the difference between the range, you want to have the small number on the small side and the large number on the large side, and that maximizes your difference. That's how you get, from 11 to 15. But then when they're getting off, we still want to try and increase the distance here by as much as possible, which means we subtract the large number from the small number to get the smallest possible number, and we subtract the small number from the large number to get the largest possible number. And you'll notice that the range has increased in size. From here it was 10 to 13, that was only a distance of 3. From here it's 8 to 13, so now I'm at a distance of 5. So by having the large number add to the large side, and then the small number subtract from the large side, I'm making the large side larger. Likewise, from the small side, by adding the small number and then subtracting the large number, which was the 3, I'm making the numbers further apart. I don't think it matters which way you process this, left to right or right to left. I did it right to left. I don't know that I had a specific reason for doing that, but let's just look real quick at kind of what we have to deal with. So with our on-ramp, we have 1 to 1. With our none, we have 10 to 14. With our none, we have 11 to 15. And with our off-ramp, we have 2 to 3. So the way that I did this is starting from the end, I have between 0 and infinity cars. I have no idea how many cars I have. Could be as many as 0, it could be as few as infinity. For anything that's an off-ramp, that doesn't really help me. I'm trying to go this way and figure out how many cars I started with. So the off-ramp really isn't information that I need to be accumulating. What I need to be knowing is what has been my gain, not so much what has been my loss. But you still probably want to focus on, with this here, when you have your off-ramp, you want to try and subtract your large number from your small side and your small number from your large side. And that'll give you an idea of what you had, sorry, this would be adding, because we're trying to go this way, left to right, and figure out how many how many we started with. Our goal is to figure out how many we started with. So 0 to infinity, if I do plus 3, that's fine. That means that I needed to have at least a minimum of 3 cars, because if this is going to allow between 2 and 3 cars to get off, I have to have had at least 3 cars for that to be the case. For the infinity plus 2, it's still just infinity. Now here's where I actually can start constraining things. I know that I have between 11 and 15 cars here. So whatever I thought I knew right here didn't really matter. I now know that at minimum I have 11, at maximum I have 15, and then after the off-ramp happens, who knows what. Still continuing to head this way. This is a looser restraint here, 10, so I'm going to ignore it. But this one is a tighter constraint, 14. For the large number, I always want to take the smallest of the 2. And for the minimum number, I always want to take the largest of the 2. So after that, I'm going to have between 10 to 14. Again, if I know that I have between 10 and 14 here and 10 and 15 here, then I know really the 14 is being constrained. But if I knew that I had as many as 11 here and I thought that I only had 10 here, again, I can ignore that because I want to try and take, again, the largest minimum and the highest maximum. So as of here, then this 10 is going to be replaced with 11, because out of 10 and 11, my largest number was 11, but out of 14 and 15, my smallest number was 15. So you're always kind of constraining towards the middle. Here I have an on-ramp. On-ramp guarantees that one person got on, but again, we would be matching the small sides and the large sides. So 11 minus 1 would be 10, that one, and then 14 minus that one would be 13. So I'll have 10 to 13. And 10 to 13 is what I have for my first line of output. As long as I'm moving left to right, remembering to, again, because I'm going left to right, I'm subtracting. Anytime I have an on-ramp, I need to be subtracting from my number. Anytime I have an off-ramp, I need to be adding to my number. Once I get to the end here, as long as I'm constraining with the innermost of every single range, I'm going to have the smallest possible range. Now I'm going to do the exact same thing going in the other direction. I'm going to start with 0 to infinity. Here I have one person getting on, which means I must have at least one person and 1 to infinity. Here it's constrained to 10 to 14, so that's going to crush my range in a bit, 10 to 14. Here again, taking the innermost, we want to try and limit the range as much as possible. So now I've got between 11 to 15. And then finally getting to my off-ramp, I want to subtract my small number from my large side, my large number from my small side. That'll give me 8. to 13. What happened there? Oh, this was 14. It was 10 to 14, not 10 to 15. So that would have been 11 to 14. We take the innermost, 11 to 14, because it was already 14 from here, so the 15 wouldn't have expanded the range. So then 14 minus 2 would be 12, and then I would at 8 to 12, and that would be my final range here. So you may want to watch that 1 or 2 more times, but that's the algorithm, and good luck putting it together in the code.